Welcome, everyone. I'm Farah Hassan, the sleep education specialist here at Project Sleep, streaming to you live from Toronto, Canada. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to be hosting this broadcast ahead of Idiopathic Hypersomnia Day, which is coming up on June 7th. And we'd like to warmly welcome Haley today, who is going to be sharing her story. Hi, Haley.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
For anyone who is tuning in live, please share the state or country that you're watching from, and please be sure to like, comment, and share this video so that we can continue to raise awareness and welcome new members into our community. I'd also like to encourage everyone to share your questions and your comments for Haley throughout the podcast, as she will be answering some questions after the presentation. And as Haley shares her story, let us know what resonates with you, things about her story that remind you of your own experiences. We'd love to hear from you. Please note that the broadcast is a public video and the comments will stay with the video. So please do be mindful that you don't share anything in the comments or the live chat that you wouldn't want to share publicly. Before I turn it over to Haley, just a quick reminder to everyone tuning in that today's presentation and discussion is intended for educational and awareness purposes and is not medical advice. We want to empower you with information, but if anything discussed today sparks questions for you about your own medical management, please make sure that you take those questions to your healthcare team or sleep specialist. So that wraps up all of our housekeeping items, and we'll get started. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Haley Wall is an occupational therapist living in El Paso, Texas. She was diagnosed with idiopathic hypersomnia 7 years ago and now raises awareness about this neurological sleep disorder. As a speaker with Project Sleep's Rising Voices program, Haley shares her story from overlooked symptoms to finding a diagnosis with the hope to increase public understanding and recognition of this misunderstood condition. So, Haley, I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Getting it shared. Oops. Bear with me 1 second.
No, you're good.
There we go. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Let's see here. Thank you so much to Project Sleep for this invitation to share my story. I am very excited. And as Farah had said, I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. So let's go back to the very beginning. I was born and raised in Mansfield, Massachusetts. The first picture here on the left is of me with my mom and dad. I was the first and only child to my wonderful parents up until the age of 5 years old. When I was 5, my small family of 3 quickly grew into a family of 5. Pictured in the middle here is me with my siblings, Kelsey and Jake, when they were about 1 year old. Becoming a big sister was one of my most cherished roles growing up, and that still holds true to this day. Throughout my childhood, I was very shy, but also loved to be active. I danced, I played soccer, basketball, and loved to be outside. I loved anything arts and crafts related and was a huge animal lover for as long as I can remember. After begging my parents for what felt like forever, our family finally adopted our very first dog in 2009 when I was about 9 years old, a beagle named Chloe, or Bobo, as we more frequently called her. A picture of our beloved Chloe is shown here on the right of the slide. Adopting Chloe was one of the greatest gifts and is one of my absolute favorite childhood memories. My health began to take a turn when I was around 8 years old. Family members started noticing some concerning symptoms, which ultimately led me to a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes in December of 2007. The first picture on the left here is of me at my very first diabetes awareness walk, where I began my journey in advocacy. I was the team captain for my Haley Walls carb counting court team, where I also had the privilege of being the ribbon cutter to start that year's walk in Boston. From the young age of 8 years old, I was blessed to have had a strong support network ranging from my family, friends, and my healthcare team. The care I received at this very vulnerable stage of my life sparked my passion for wanting to grow up and work in the healthcare field where I could help other people. Although I had to rely a lot on my parents to navigate this new way of life in the beginning, I was shown from a very early age the importance and value of advocating for my needs across a multitude of settings. By the time I was 12 years old, I began noticing I was saying how tired I was feeling to my family and even my doctors. When I voiced my concerns, they had always been attributed to my diabetes, anxiety, and/or depression. My doctor's appointments primarily addressed my pre-existing health conditions, often leaving my sleepiness more of an afterthought. There were many attempts to approach my treatment in a different way through lifestyle management, healthier diet, and trying different medication regimens. Despite everything I tried, nothing really was helping how I was feeling. With no additional concerns expressed by my healthcare team about my sleepiness, I continued just to try to get a better handle on my health and never really had a reason to question the possibility of anything further. My sleepiness continued to show up in various areas of my life throughout high school, especially during my late junior into my senior year. I was still really active with school, babysitting, and spending as much time as I could with my friends. Towards the end of my junior year of high school, I can remember one time arriving to the house I babysat at after school and accidentally falling asleep on their couch almost immediately. I remember only waking up to the noises of laughter coming from the kids just getting home from school. I distinctly remember one of the kids looking at me and saying, "You look really tired. You can take a nap if you want to. We'll be okay." I felt incredibly embarrassed at this moment, thinking to myself, how in the world am I so tired that I can't even just stay awake for 30 minutes waiting for the kids to get home? I also felt really embarrassed because this was my job. Watching these kids was a responsibility that I took very, very seriously. As a senior in high school, I can remember my sleepiness becoming more intense and prominent in my day-to-day life. I remember one time we were scheduled to watch a movie during my English class, and as soon as the lights were turned off, I was fighting every ounce of my being just to keep my eyelids open. I had slept great the night before, so I didn't really understand why it was becoming so increasingly difficult to stay awake and alert. I remember looking around the room and seeing others not paying attention or purposely laying their head on the desk. However, the difference for me was that I was actively trying not to fall asleep. Being a busy kid, I just continued to brush it off and chalking it up to everything I'd been told by my doctors before. At 18 years old, I graduated from high school, excited to start the new chapter of my life. The picture here in the middle of the slide was taken in front of the huge athletic building on the day I committed to attending the University of New England in Biddeford, Maine. I was incredibly eager to pursue my dreams that started back at the age of 8 years old in a profession where I'd be helping others in more vulnerable stages of their own lives. In August of 2017, I began my journey towards achieving my Bachelor of Science in Health, Wellness, and Occupational Studies. My ultimate goal was to attend graduate school and earn my Master of Science in Occupational Therapy. Now I'm going to take you back. It's Sunday, August 27th, 2017, and just an ordinary day for was one of the most exciting days of my life, freshman year move-in day. I remember being really anxious because I'd never been that far away from my family before, and I was about to be living with a girl I'd never met. But I was so ready to start this new chapter of my life. Picture this, a very small dorm room with only about 3 feet in between both twin beds that were pressed up against the walls with not just one, but 7 family members, including myself, jammed into this small space that I now called my home. At that moment, I knew I was in for a year filled with forever memories. A few hours after getting myself settled, I finally got to meet the girl I'd be sharing such a small living space with, Julia. Pictured here on the right is me and Julia at one of the beaches down the street from our main campus. Little did we know at the time, but she would soon to grow to become one of my best friends from that point forward. My college classes started about a week after move-in, Once classes began is when I started noticing how different my own morning routine was compared to my roommate and other peers in my building. I had to wake up about 2 to 2.5 hours before I actually had to, just because it was taking me so incredibly long in the morning to get myself going. I'd have to set at least 8 alarms on full volume with only 5 minutes in between each just to wake me up enough to roll out of bed. Imagine being my roommate here. Thankfully, she wasn't bothered by it. It took me 3 times longer than anyone else around me to do the simple, basic things: brush my teeth, take a shower, get dressed, have breakfast. I remember comparing it to feeling like a walking zombie. I felt like I was stuck in this fog of sleep, even though I was standing upright and technically awake. I was constantly dropping things, bumping into the hallways, on my way down to the shared bathrooms, and I just remember being really jealous of how easy it appeared to be for most people to just roll out of bed and start walking to class within 20 minutes after waking up. I can vividly remember thinking to myself, why does it feel like the most difficult task of my entire day is simply waking up? Again, I was going through a huge change in every aspect of my life, so I brushed it off. I really wanted to make the most of my first few weeks as a new college student. I wanted to make new friends, explore my campus, everything you'd expect a newly independent 18-year-old living outside her parents' home for the first time would want to do. The semester started to pick up, and I was doing well academically, despite my sleepiness becoming more and more prominent. I remember one day, about 2.5 weeks into my first semester, I was walking back to my room after a late afternoon class, and I was about to take a nap. I only had 2 classes that day, but I was so incredibly exhausted. Instead of joining my roommate and new friends for lunch at the dining hall, I was going back to my room to sleep. It felt like turning down opportunities to spend time with my friends was becoming my new normal. I wanted to go with them, but I needed to sleep. So that's what I did. Even though the night before I'd gotten plenty of sleep, it felt like I'd been awake for over 48 hours straight. I remember being really confused and defeated. I had this uncontrollable, insatiable need to sleep. Why was I this tired? My friends would say they were tired, but usually that was after staying up really late studying for an exam or to finish that one assignment that was due at midnight. No one was really talking about how every spare minute of their day was being planned into napping opportunities. That just appeared to be me. With my college courses in full swing, I was finding it extremely, difficult to stay alert in class. I would catch myself accidentally dozing off without realizing it, and I remember being really embarrassed, hoping no one saw, and started thinking I was uninterested or just not taking care of myself. I was finding it really hard to stay focused and concentrated in my longer lectures, fighting my body to just stay awake. I luckily felt I was able to kind of hide my exhaustion fairly well from my professors and classmates. However, then I found myself having to spend hours going over the information on my own time because I hadn't retained much from being in class. I can remember sitting down to complete a homework assignment for my anatomy course that included a lot of reading after a full days of class. I spent what felt like 5 times as long to complete it than it appeared to for any other of my classmates and friends. I felt like my brain was moving as if my entire body was trudging through 5 feet of sinking mud. And I just remember feeling really lonely at this point because no one else around me appeared to be struggling as much as I had been. No one I talked to seemed to really even understand what I was experiencing, or at least not to the excruciating level that I was feeling every single day. Julia and I started to develop a stronger friendship after just a few short weeks of living together. I can remember laughing so hard as we talked about all the horror stories we heard about going into college with a random roommate and how lucky we were to have ended up with each other. She was becoming one of my absolute best friends. Julia seemed to understand me more than most other people did. She was living in such a close space, whereas we reached our arms out from our beds, we could touch each other's fingertips, so we were seeing each other's way of life in a different way. The closer our friendship grew, the more she started to notice and share some weird tendencies that I had that all revolved around me being asleep. One time, Julie and I had been taking a nap in our room in the middle of the day because we had gotten out of our classes early. Our university held a lot of fire drills in our dorms during this time because most students were in class or just simply not in their rooms at that point in the day. This particular afternoon happened to be the day of our dorm fire drill. I remember waking up to Julia standing over me, and after a few seconds, recognizing this awful loud siren blaring through our room. As she stood next to my bed, I remember she said, "Dude, I literally just had to pinch your nose together just to wake you up. How didn't that siren wake you up? Get up! I don't know if this is a real fire drill, but we gotta go." It ended up being just a drill, but later that night, I remember having a conversation with Julia about how hard it was to wake me up, and even after I was awake, how long it took me to just come to it. She told me as soon as we were allowed back inside, I immediately crawled back in bed and fell asleep for another hour. Being incredibly difficult to wake up would become a very common occurrence that Julia would share with me. The more she shared about her observations of me and my sleeping habits, the more I started to wonder how normal this actually was. It took Julia telling me this is not normal for me to realize there had to be another explanation. No one else had ever lived in such close quarters to me before, so no one had ever mentioned anything like this. I always had the assumption that my experiences were normal, but Julia gratefully was in the position to help me realize that there had to be another explanation. At that point, I decided it was time to bring my concerns to my primary care doctor again. So that's what I did. I made an appointment with my primary care doctor back in Massachusetts to bring all these concerns that I'd been experiencing to light. They were really starting to impact my everyday life as an 18-year-old just trying to get through her first semester of college. It was only at this time, after expressing my excessive sleepiness to doctors since I'd been 12 years old, had I been referred to a sleep specialist. I was scheduled for a sleep study during the time I was home for my winter break. Finally, after a long 6 years of my sleepiness being attributed to my existing health conditions, I was hopeful to have the opportunity to find more answers. An overnight sleep study was completed and followed by a daytime nap study where I had to take scheduled naps throughout the day. Pictured on the left is the night of my sleep study with all the electrodes that I had to wear for the next 20 hours attached to my face. On the right, the top picture is the results of my overnight sleep study. It showed that my overnight sleep was normal without any significant disruptions. The bottom right picture is the results of my daytime nap study, the multiple sleep latency test, or the MSLT. These results showed, despite having 8 hours of non-disrupted overnight sleep, I was still able to fall asleep in each of the 5 scheduled naps within an average of 4.8 minutes. The last column on this picture with all the zeros showed that I didn't enter REM sleep in any of these planned naps. I remember sitting in the follow-up appointment with my mom and doctor to discuss the sleep study results, and the doctor explained that there was, in fact, a reason behind all of my sleepiness. It was not my diabetes, it was not anxiety, and it was not depression. I had a sleep disorder, idiopathic hypersomnia. I had never heard of idiopathic hypersomnia before, but I remember feeling so relieved. I was not crazy, and I was not exaggerating. The last 6 years had been validated from this one conversation. At this point, I thought that I would start taking treatment and everything would start to get better, but unfortunately, that was not the case. Idiopathic hypersomnia is a central disorder of hypersomnolence that's often underrecognized and misunderstood. It's a chronic neurological sleep disorder. People with IH are very sleepy despite getting normal or longer than normal amounts of sleep. The exact cause of the sleep disorder is unknown, hence the term idiopathic in the name. It's estimated to affect 1 in 20,000 people. Idiopathic hypersomnia symptoms may vary by person, but can include excessive daytime sleepiness despite adequate or typically longer than adequate nighttime sleep. If you remember earlier, I explained how I felt incredibly tired despite having a good night's sleep all the time. That was an example and still is an example of excessive daytime sleepiness. Long sleep duration. Although sleeping for long periods at night is not a requirement of the disorder, people with IH can often sleep for at least 11 hours or more a day and may exceed up to 14 or more hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. Unrefreshing and non-restorative sleep. Even a full night's sleep or long naps result in feeling no better or worse upon waking than before falling asleep. I found this to be especially true during daytime naps. Regardless of how long or short the nap is, I tend to wake up feeling worse than I did before falling asleep. Sleep inertia. Sleep inertia occurs during the transitional state after waking with a strong desire to return to sleep and feeling foggy. It's an extreme difficulty waking from sleep that's much more difficult and prolonged. It is accompanied by feelings of grogginess and disorientation upon waking. Sleep inertia can also cause difficulty thinking clearly and make carrying out basic daily tasks extremely difficult. Earlier, I was describing how in my first week at college, I noticed my morning routines were really different than my peers. I was having to wake up 2 to 2.5 hours before I actually had to, simply because it took me so long to just get going. This was the example of sleep inertia. Extreme difficulty waking up. People with IH commonly fall back asleep multiple times when trying to awaken and need multiple alarms or assistance from others. If you remember earlier, I shared how setting 8 alarms at full volume just to wake me up in the morning in college, and also having a fire alarm not even wake me up when I was in that deep of a sleep. Falling asleep accidentally. One of the memories that stands out for me most was when I was describing how when I was in high school, I fell asleep almost immediately on the couch of the families I babysat, and that was not a conscious decision on my part. Brain fog. Brain fog is a mental fogginess that impairs cognitive functions such as thinking and articulating thoughts clearly, memory, concentration, and attention. Do you remember back when I described how it felt like my brain was moving so slow? It felt like I was trudging through 5 feet of sinking mud during that homework assignment. That was brain fog. Brain fog has also come to show more often in my daily life as I've gotten older, with implications in my short-term memory, attention, and concentration. Some people with IH can also experience headaches, dizziness, and/or cold hands and feet, and difficulty coping with social life, work, education, and sometimes even basic daily tasks because of sleepiness, which can lead to depression and feelings of isolation. Diagnosis typically involves medical tests to check and rule out other potential causes of sleepiness, such as narcolepsy or other sleep disorders. Seeing a sleep specialist is recommended. A healthcare provider will ask questions about symptoms and your sleep. Some providers may ask people to monitor their sleep and wake activity for several days by keeping a sleep diary or wearing a clinical device such as an actigraph to gain more information. To check for other sleep disorders, an overnight sleep study, known as a nocturnal polysomnogram, is done followed by a multiple sleep latency test the next day, where the person is asked to nap for 20 minutes for every 2 hours. Wires are attached to various points of the body to monitor and measure breathing patterns, heart rate, brain activity, and body movements while asleep. Both tests are completed in a sleep center or lab. People who fall asleep in less than 8 minutes and don't enter REM in more than 2 of the 5 recorded naps may have idiopathic hypersomnia. As there is currently no cure for IH, the goal of treatment is to live well by managing alertness. Treatment for symptom management varies by person, but may include medications to help people feel more alert and active when awake and sleep more deeply at night. These may include stimulants, non-stimulant wake-promoting agents, oxybates, antidepressants, and medications that target the GABA system. Only one medication is currently approved by the FDA specifically for IH. The other medications are known to be effective in treating sleepiness and other sleep disorders, such as narcolepsy, and are often used off-label to treat IH. Treating other sleep disorders and avoiding certain medications is helpful to reduce other potential causes of sleepiness. Coping strategies can also vary by person, but may include social support, such as meetup groups or social media, counseling with a therapist for emotional support, and improvements in general health and wellness through sleep, hygiene, diet, and fitness. Throughout my diagnosis, I have found stimulants to be the most beneficial medications that help me stay awake. That being said, the medications do not take away every symptom I experience on a daily basis, but they do help me have a few more functional hours in my day. Maintaining my overall health through frequent collaboration with my healthcare team has also been really helpful in my life with IH. As I mentioned at the beginning, IH is not my only medical condition. So I've noticed that with my diabetes, if my blood sugars are off, my IH symptoms tend to get a little bit more exacerbated. So I try as best as I can to stay active, have a healthy and balanced diet, and always prioritize my sleep. Through my OT education, I've also found some different coping strategies that I've incorporated into my daily life to help manage my IH. I use multisensory tools such as crunchy foods, temperature, movement, and fidgets to promote more alertness and wakefulness. Life with IH, for me personally, can be compared to a roller coaster. There are many ups and downs with a lot of unpredictability. All in flow is a quote a friend had shared with me years ago that resonated so closely with me and is still my own little mantra. IH can be really overwhelming, so I consistently work to take each day as it comes, all in flow. I'm grateful I was able to receive a diagnosis early on in my college career, as I was not only able to understand my own experiences better, but I was then also able to ensure I had appropriate accommodations in place to support me in reaching my goals. It just so happened the accommodations I already had in place for my diabetes significantly supported my needs for IH in my undergrad studies. I was able to have early registration for my courses so I could register for classes that started a bit later in the morning rather than that 8 a.m. class. With the ability to craft my schedule better to support my needs, I was able to keep up with my courses with the help of medication. I took a few online courses throughout summers to be able to have a lighter course load during the academic school year, which was incredibly helpful. I graduated with my bachelor's degree summa cum laude, which is an achievement I worked incredibly hard for. I am also very happy to share that I graduated with my Master of Science in Occupational Therapy in May of 2023. This is a picture on the day I graduated, along with the pin I received after passing my certification exam. The transition from undergrad to grad school was incredibly challenging. With a more rigorous curriculum, I had to adjust my accommodation to add new supports with my university. The most beneficial accommodation that helped me get through grad school was having a recording pen so that I could record and listen to lectures on my own time if my brain fog or my excessive daytime sleepiness impacted my attention and engagement while I was present in class. I was also allowed to park my car in closer areas to my academic buildings so that I could go out to my car to nap or rest if I felt that I needed to. I had other accommodations set in place, which many I only used occasionally. However, the relief of knowing I had those supports provided me a great sense of security for those just in case moments. A few days before my 22nd birthday, I adopted my sweet rider boy. This is a picture of us exploring the beautiful town in Kennebunkport, Maine, riding in a golf cart, where he was clearly a very happy boy. Throughout my undergraduate studies, I found myself focusing so much on my education that I didn't prioritize other areas of my health. My excessive daytime sleepiness and brain fog made it really hard to balance my academics with every other aspect of life. So, a few weeks before starting my graduate program, I decided to adopt a dog to sort of give me an obligation outside of myself to not only step away from my schoolwork every once in a while, but also to increase my physical activity. Finding time to go to the gym or getting in a workout has always been a challenge with having limited energy. My rider boy has played a significant role in my life over the last 4 years. The first thing that I do every morning when I wake up is I take him out for a walk. This routine has actually helped me with my sleep inertia. Having that movement and sunshine as the first thing I do helps me kind of kickstart that transition of getting my day going. We also go on nightly walks that are typically longer, which has been essential in consistently getting me moving every day. He helps me slow down. He helps me enjoy the small moments in each day. And most importantly, he's provided me with unconditional love and unofficial emotional support. Self-awareness and lifestyle adaptations have kind of gone hand in hand for me. From the age of 8 years old, when I was diagnosed with diabetes, my life required me to be more self-aware than the average 8-year-old. I had to adjust my diet, fitness, and way of going about life. This has evolved even further throughout the years with IH. Being aware of my functional hours each day has allowed me to adapt my schedule in a way that I'm able to show up as my best self. I've officially been working as a pediatric occupational therapist for about a year now. And when I was searching for jobs, I knew I needed to find a job that was flexible and conducive to the hours of my day that I know I do my best. I'm unable to work full time due to the implications of my IH. However, working part time still has allowed me to practice in my field and also gives me more time to work on having a greater occupational balance in my own life. The life I live currently may not align with what I've envisioned growing up, but I've learned that that's okay. Relationships have also been a bit of a challenge. However, I am incredibly grateful for my friends, family, and my husband. This is a picture of my husband and me and Ryder, of course, on the day we got married in 2023. I actually met my now husband just after receiving my IH diagnosis back in my freshman year of college. We've been together for 7 years, and he has now been in the military for about 2.5 years. Life with IH has definitely not made my marriage easy, as I believe it's really challenging for him to understand the realities of how my sleep disorder really impacts my life. We've had to have a lot of open, uncomfortable conversations about financial plans, especially with me not being able to work full time. Being able to have all of these realistic but also hopeful goals together in our marriage has been something that I greatly appreciate. My relationships with my family have also played such a huge factor in where I am today. About a year ago, I moved across the country from Maine to Texas for my husband's military orders, and it was and still is one of the hardest things I've gone through in my life. My family and support network have always been within an easy driving distance, whereas now there are about 2,500 miles that separate us. FaceTime has been a saving grace, but it's been really hard so far. The roommate I spoke about from my freshman year, Julia, is still my best friend, and she was the one who graciously offered to help me drive across the country for this move. This is a picture of Julia and me as we're making a stop in Nashville, Tennessee on our drive. Moving across the country was one of the most stressful experiences I've ever gone through. Knowing this, Julia took the initiative to plan out our trip by mapping out how much driving we'd do each day, different hotels to stay at in each state that we stopped in for the night, and she was incredibly open to figuring out how to make the best out of this journey while supporting my needs with IH. I was so incredibly grateful for the way that she helped me through not just the planning of this trip, but also with how aware she was of my needs. The unconditional support Julia has shown me throughout the years has been one of life's most valuable gifts. Being part of the sleep disorder community was something that I actually wasn't involved in until just a few short years ago. When I passed my OT certification exam, I went searching for different IH resources with the hopes to find a way to integrate my lived experience with my IH into my career. I unfortunately was not able to find much in this area. However, during this search, I came across the Hypersomnia Foundation and Project Sleep. Shortly after, I started my own social media pages as a sleepy OT as a way to help spread more awareness and build a community where people felt seen, heard, and less alone. Little did I know how much these social media accounts would change my life. I've been able to connect with other people from all over the world who have IH or a related sleep disorder and share experiences and stories and emotions and develop so many meaningful relationships. I attended my very first conference this past June, and believe it or not, that was the first time I'd ever met another person with IH or narcolepsy in person. The immediate sense of understanding, connection, and just family opened me into a community that I truly did not know I needed until I was in it. I am so grateful for organizations like Project Sleep and Hypersomnia Foundation as they give us a way to foster these connections and communities that is so desperately needed in the sleep disorder community. I have struggled with my mental health due to some implications IH has had on my life. I've struggled with depression from the isolation my sleep disorder has created and consistently battle with anxiety, especially with the unpredictability IH can throw my way on any given day. Something I've worked really hard to prioritize in my life has been my mental health. As I mentioned before, I've struggled with prioritizing specific areas while ignoring many others. Each day, I try to engage in at least one thing that brings me joy, and that is not a need. I have found life with IH is a constant battle between having to choose between my needs and my wants. This is a picture of Ryder snuggled up with me while I was reading a book. Reading has become an outlet for me, a way to kind of immerse myself in different stories and adventures. Every single night before I go to bed for the last about 3 years, I read. Some nights I'm only able to keep my eyelids open for about 5 pages, but it's still been a way for me to prioritize doing a want versus a need. Giving myself grace has also not been easy, but it's something I work to improve upon every single day. I am my own hardest critic and often hold a really high standard for myself. I've been learning that regardless of what I may or may not be able to do some days, that doesn't define me as a person, and that certainly does not define my worth. Taking time to rest is okay. Prioritizing my well-being is okay. There is no playbook on how to best navigate life with IH, so all I can do is do my best. As I mentioned before, I had an opportunity to attend my first conference held by the Hypersomnia Foundation last year, where I was a guest speaker on their young adult panel. The first picture here is at the conference where I was a recipient of their 2024 Community Advocate Award. I plan to attend their annual conference again this year, where I'll be speaking about the role of patient advocacy in advancing IH awareness and sitting on a relationship panel. I plan to continue getting involved in as many IH awareness initiatives as I can. This is a picture of this year's Idiopathic Hypersomnia Awareness Week, which will begin June 1st and go through June 7th. I am incredibly excited to celebrate the second annual Idiopathic Hypersomnia Day on June 7th, 2025, surrounded by those in the sleep disorder community. Since becoming a practicing occupational therapist, I've integrated my passion for sleep health and education into my career with the clients that I work with. During evaluations, I ask clients and families questions about their sleep patterns and any potential concerns around sleep. This has allowed me as an allied healthcare professional to prioritize sleep health in my work and screen for any potential signs of a sleep disorder. My lived experience has provided me knowledge to ask these questions. In June, I actually plan to give a presentation for the company that I work with about the importance of addressing sleep and screening for potential signs of sleep disorders within the pediatric population. I hope to increase awareness across a multitude of multidisciplinary health professions to improve understanding and the recognitions of signs that could make lasting impacts on the individuals that we work with. Because of low awareness, even among physicians and misperceptions, people with idiopathic hypersomnia typically go years or even decades between symptom onset and diagnosis. It's estimated that the majority of people with IH are currently undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. I am very grateful that I was able to receive my IH diagnosis early on in my college career. However, that's not a common experience. When I would bring up my concerns about being tired all the time, there was always an automatic assumption that my pre-existing health conditions were the cause. I wasn't asked the questions to deepen the understanding behind the why, or even how my sleepiness was impacting the way that I lived my life. Prior to my diagnosis, I'd never heard of idiopathic hypersomnia before. I was unaware that what I was experiencing was actual symptoms of a sleep disorder. Since my diagnosis, I now know that the way I used to describe my experiences, like tired or difficulty getting going in the morning, had actual terms: excessive daytime sleepiness and sleep inertia. So many people are unaware of sleep disorders like IH, and that's why I have such a strong passion to raise awareness by sharing my story like I am today. By talking about the symptoms of IH, my goal is that these terms that anyone can read on a piece of paper are given meaning through my own personal experiences and examples of how they've shown up in my own life. By hearing my story, maybe you resonate with these experiences yourself. Maybe you're a roommate or a loved one to someone you recognize these symptoms in, like my roommate Julia did. Or maybe you're just someone looking to gain more knowledge and understanding about this under-recognized sleep disorder. Regardless of how you may resonate with my story, my hope is that creating more public awareness about idiopathic hypersomnia can help even just one person out there who's feeling lost and defeated in their own journey. Without Julia helping me recognize how not normal my experiences actually were, I may not have continued to bring up my sleepiness to my doctors. If I hadn't continued to self-advocate to them, I may have never received a diagnosis. And without a diagnosis, I likely would not be where I am today sharing my story with you all. My diagnosis of IH at 18 years old helped me start treatment earlier, set up accommodations to support my academic endeavors, and most importantly, helped me have a better understanding of myself. Early detection can play such a significant role in the well-being and quality of life of so many lives that live undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, and incredibly misunderstood. It's estimated that 1 in 5 people are living with a sleep disorder. There are a wide variety of sleep disorders, and symptoms can be really hard to detect. If you have any questions about your own sleep, personalized support and resources are available through Project Sleep's Sleep Helpline, a free national helpline for people facing sleep issues and sleep disorders. I am sharing my story today as part of Rising Voices, a program of the nonprofit organization Project Sleep, which empowers patient advocates to share their stories and improve public understanding of sleep disorders. Thank you so much for listening to my story.
Haley, thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful. So much love in the comments. So many people resonating with, um, I mean, a lot of fans of going for morning walks with your dogs. So that's there. Um, I had a ton of things that resonated with me personally. So thank you, first of all, for taking the time to share your story with us today. So I kind of wanted to selfishly start with a few questions that I had.
Yeah.
I think it was so inspiring to hear of, your early start in advocacy, and even though it started, in a different space, it's wonderful to hear that, last year you were able to last year, that you were able to, be at the conference, and we have some fans who were in attendance and speak very highly of you. I'm wondering, over the span of so many years, have you noticed any changes in sort of the way you view advocacy, the importance of it, even how you approach it? Because obviously it's a very personal experience, and it takes a lot of giving to open
Absolutely.
up and share. So yeah, I'm just curious to hear about, if you had an evolution in
Yeah,
that.
I would say I definitely within the last like 2 years, I definitely felt more and more strongly about the role of advocacy. Um, in school, it was really hard to balance life, so I wasn't really in the advocacy world, but stepping outside and kind of seeing this need for uh, voices, and each story is so different. And there, when I went on social media, there were people posting about IH, but there wasn't a lot about it. And there was a lot more about narcolepsy, which is absolutely incredible. So I really wanted to get on there and start my own social media to give voice to more idiopathic hypersomnia um, content in people, just to help resonate and hopefully maybe recognize symptoms in themselves if they've never realized of a sleep disorder could be something that they possess themselves. um, but I definitely feel as an occupational therapist too, it's really grown. There's such a strong role of advocacy for me with the patients and clients that I work with. And so it's all fueled and is something I'm so incredibly passionate about. And I strive to do better every day.
Well, you're doing wonderful work, and sounds like you have been pretty much your whole life. So, yeah, thank you for, the effort that you put into that. Absolutely. It's so important. And, I think with IH Day coming up, and, it's just such a big win to now have that additional level of awareness. So yeah, happy almost IH Day.
Happy almost IH day.
So we had some questions. Taylor and Caitlin, who both I think attended the conference last year, and just really benefited from, being able to hear about your experience, are here with us today. So hello to Taylor and Caitlin. Taylor's question is, do you have any favorite moments or stories from, your advocacy, whether it was online experiences or in-person experiences?
My favorite experience so far was attending that conference and walking into a room of people that I knew immediately understood me on such a deeper level than I've ever experienced in my life. It, as I said before, it was like an instant feeling of family and no judgment at all. it was such a wonderful experience to be able to walk into a room and, have people recognize me from my social media pages and, just make those connections. That's been my favorite memory so far.
That's wonderful. I had a similar experience last year too, and I made note of that when you said, it feels like family. It's like a surreal thing
It
to
is.
have that experience of walking into the room for the first time. And, again, it's such a wonderful community. People have, seen, your social media and heard your story in different ways, and it's really phenomenal. Yeah, absolutely. Um, You talked, towards the end of your presentation about showing yourself grace, and that's, of course, such a big part of managing the experience. I wanted to hear a little bit more about, how you find that balance, because you talked about your, your I think you said kickstarting your day and trying to build these habits and things. And of course, there are days when unexpectedly it's tough, and I think a lot of people in many different contexts try to balance, like, no, I just have to push through, and also recognizing, like, today is a day that I need to just be kind to myself. How do you make that decision, or what goes into that?
The process that typically goes on in my mind, and again, it's evolved. It used to be, I will not lie and say I spoke to myself the best way that I possibly could have. And
Mhm.
there's still days, that I get really frustrated that I'm not able to do absolutely everything that I want to get done. Um, but I have found having the self-awareness of different activities take a different amount of energy and mental capacity from me. So those activities or tasks, I really try to spread them out throughout the week, depending on the level of priority they need my attention.
Right.
So, if I need to get my laundry done, I maybe don't have to get it all done in one day. And that's okay. Even though I may sit there and be like, oh, I just want to get it all done. I want to be done with it. It's sometimes just spreading things out like that is what's necessary to just have that balance for myself.
Yeah.
But trying to be more aware and mindful of the way that I'm speaking to myself. Again, because mostly it's just me speaking to myself the way that I am. Nobody else is doing that. So I have to remember that I'm doing the best that I can, and that's all I can do at this point, and I'm okay with that.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful strategy too, I think, to just consider breaking it down. Like, we think of like a single task as like get it done in one go, but that's such a great, like, I'm thinking about my own laundry now and I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe I don't have to do all of it tonight.
Yeah.
So that's a great tip, honestly, in terms of managing energy. Yeah. So, I'm always excited to meet people in healthcare, across different disciplines. You touched on this a little bit, about, how your own experiences have affected the way you practice as an OT. Everyone is super excited by the way that you are asking questions about sleepiness and screening, and it's just so exciting to hear. And I was hoping you could just talk a little bit more about that, how your your work and, obviously all the personal experiences you've had sort of influenced the way even broach the subject. I'm sure, you see clients who maybe are more open to exploring certain things, and, some who just deal with the same stigma that all of us in the community do, and maybe aren't as open. So yeah, just curious to hear a little bit more about how that affects your professional practice.
Yeah. So going in straight away, I just had that view of sleep is so essential because of my lived experience with IH. I prioritize sleep over a lot of things because I know how much I need that for me to be okay. Um, I have found, with the population that I work in pediatrics. A lot of the children are neurodivergent, and there is a correlation between sleep disturbances and neurodivergence. So, I felt it was so essential to make sure, as a primary area of occupation, sleep is addressed. And, a lot of occupational therapists, I'm sure, do, ask questions about sleep. Are you sleeping okay? But we aren't really trained very deeply in a way on how to ask more questions and really get down to the bottom of things. And, if it's something that warrants a referral to a sleep specialist for potential sleep disorder, I I feel I have the knowledge based on
Yeah.
my experience to be able to recognize that. So, my goal is I'm only one person and I only can have, a certain amount of clients that I work with per day and per week. Um, but my goal is to help bring that awareness to other allied health care professionals so that, we can make a difference and be part of that shift in healthcare to have earlier detection and have an influence on the sleep field in a way that, may not seem traditional, but can be very impactful.
I love the way that you talk about it in sort of this collaborative mindset of, because and of course, ultimately it's so important to get someone to a sleep specialist and, pursue a diagnosis. But so many of those initial interactions happen with people who aren't physicians, but people who, have, a background in health and like it's just about putting it on their radar that, hey, this is something to screen for and ask questions for. So yeah, I love that way of thinking. I hope more people adopt it for sure.
Me too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're well on your way to making that impact. So absolutely. On the topic of becoming an OT, you mentioned that it was a dream of yours to ultimately get your master's, and congrats on, fulfilling that. That must have been such an intense probably moment, given, all of the barriers that led to it. Um, I'd love to hear about, you know, a little bit about, I guess, that emotional journey too. Did you have times where you questioned whether you were gonna, get there or, doubting your ability to do it despite knowing that, again, you mentioned you were doing okay in class and figured out ways to mask it, but it takes a toll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, there were the transition to grad school was something I don't think I was prepared for.
Mhm.
It was a lot faster paced, and the, amount of content that we were learning was just so much more complex and dense, which I loved. I loved learning about everything, but it was a lot. I will not sit here and say, oh, yeah, it was a breeze. No, there were many times that
Yeah.
I went home crying, just thinking like, oh my gosh, can I do this? Is this the right path for me? Um, through lectures and field work. Field work was definitely really challenging. You're
Hmm.
working a full-time job with someone and you're trying to be a sponge and absorb as much as you can. And there were many times that I doubted myself. But what ultimately I always came back to was, I am I am doing as best as I can. I am doing it. It doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. And I know that I have this drive to be able to help other people in vulnerable stages of their life where OT is definitely in a career field where that happens. Um, so I kept pushing. I wouldn't have been able to get through it if I did not have the support I did through my family, my friends, Ryder specifically too. He was a huge part. My school faculty were incredible with my accommodations and anything that I needed. I would not have been able to get through without all of that. So,
Hmm.
I wasn't completely on my own. And that I know that's not always a very typical experience for everybody, but I'm very grateful that that was my experience. And that's kind of what got me to where I am today.
Absolutely. And let's take a moment to acknowledge Julia, who is just a really, I mean, just hearing about, that friendship and just such thoughtful things that, she, did, especially as you described the move. I know Julie was saying, friend of the year award for Julia in the chat. So yeah, let's take a moment to just acknowledge that amazing, amazing support. It makes a world of difference for sure.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
she's in healthcare too. She's a nurse. So
Oh yeah.
it was interesting to also kind of see her clinical view on things as we were both,
Mhm.
entering into a healthcare field.
Yeah. Oh, that must have provided like a whole other level of just really amazing insight.
Yeah. She's incredible. I love her. If she's
Yeah.
watching, we love you.
Hi, Julia. We love you. I wanted to take a few, we have a few minutes left. I was hoping you could talk about the sensory techniques that you were talking, or you mentioned earlier, because I think that could be beneficial to a lot of people. Um, that, and I love that you mentioned parking nearby for naps. That's something that I've done, and I was like, that's a really good tip. But yeah, if you could speak to sensory techniques, I think that's something, I don't know how many people have heard about that or as familiar.
Yeah, that is something I definitely can attribute my knowledge with my OT background.
Hmm.
I've learned a lot about sensory integration in the nervous system and, different levels of arousal, alertness. So, with that knowledge, I have trial and errored so many different activities to see if they help me with my own alertness. So, movement has proved to be something that is essential. Sitting at a desk or sitting in one spot for too long of a period causes anybody to feel more sleepy. But
Hmm.
with IH, it's like, whew, my goodness gracious, I got to get up and move. So, trying to plan out scheduled time so I'm not sitting and I'm being more proactive than reactive has definitely helped. Um, for this temperature in the room. My house is always a lot colder than,
Hmm.
maybe most people may like it, but that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me more
Yeah.
alert. If it's warm, I will likely be falling asleep
It's a little
wherever
too
I am.
cozy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've found, crunchy foods, um, sour tastes, different textures to be more alerting. So, if I'm driving in the car for longer distances, I always plan ahead. I don't drive if I don't feel that it's safe. But if
Mm.
I am driving more than an hour, I will typically have, like some snacks with me, a fizzy drink that's really cold, things
Okay.
that help kind of just like, whoa, okay, let's wake up,
Yeah.
alert that nervous system. Um, I found those things like that to be really helpful in my life on the day to day. And again, there definitely are times that they're like, oh, that's not working today.
Mhm.
But, you know, I have a few tools in my back pocket that have proven to show up for me most times.
Yeah. That's those are some great tips. I think, especially when people are in the car, like it's like, okay, blast the music, put the windows down so it's cold, but yeah, texture of food and taste is like I wouldn't have thought of that. So thank you for putting that on my radar.
Yeah, of course.
Um that's great. I'll definitely have to keep that in mind for my next drive. Yeah. Well, we're pretty much at time. Is there anything else that you would like to, share or mention? Oh, you know what? Did we talk about sleep inertia? We did
We can
not.
quickly.
Okay. Yeah, no, take your time. I was like, oh, I gotta make sure we cover this. You talked about it in so many different ways, and you mentioned towards the end, kind of having the language to call something, what it is medically, which puts it on the radar, and that was such a great way of describing it. I think you're talking about like, colloquially, it's like hard to get going in the morning, and once you have the term sleep inertia it made a big difference. So yeah, floor is yours. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So with sleep inertia, I think I was confused about what it was for so long. Um, Even, years after my diagnosis, I was like, no, I don't experience sleep inertia. What do you, but that's was not the reality. The more experience you have, the more you learn. So I have learned, it's kind of an analogy that I think of when it comes to a light switch with one of those dimmers. So, when we're sleeping, everything is off, the dimmer is completely down. And when we wake up, that light switch will turn on. For any person, with sleep disorder or not, waking up is usually not a pleasant experience. So it can take, a few minutes to get that dimmer up to about like 10%, 15%. You get up, you go to the bathroom, you brush your teeth, you do what you do. Then you're getting out and going to make a cup of coffee. Usually by that time, you can still feel sleepy, but you're probably at about like 50%, maybe
Right.
higher alertness level. Then you do everything else, have breakfast, get dressed. And, if it's not already at 100 for the brightness level, then it's at like 95, 100, around
Yeah.
there.
Pretty much up there, yeah.
Right. So with IH, the way that I kind of compare it for somebody without IH to kind of understand a little bit better is that first of all, that switch to turn on takes probably 5 to 10 times longer to happen. I know personally, it still
Hmm.
takes me about 10 alarms to wake up fully, to, roll myself out of bed and
Hmm.
do absolutely the same exact routine as somebody else, but it goes in the most slowest pace ever for the brightness level. So
Right.
that, getting up and going to the bathroom, brushing my teeth, I'm still at only 5% of dim. So it's still really dark and foggy and I'm still having a really hard time thinking clearly, and I'm still bumping into the hallway and dropping things. And, I make a cup of coffee, maybe goes up to 15 at the maximum. And it
Right.
just takes such an incredibly long time. For me, I found about 2.5, maybe 3 hours now that I have
Right.
to give myself each morning to feel awake and alert enough and safe enough to start going about my day, going to work.
Yeah.
Um, so just being able to kind of recognize the difference between, waking up as someone without a sleep disorder is not easy. I'm not saying it's easy for anybody, but
Hmm.
waking up with IH or sleep disorder is just such a prolonged and difficult experience
Hmm.
for those of us that, have this diagnosis. And
Right.
it's kind of been an interesting way for me to think about it as I've learned more about what it actually is.
Yeah. That dimmer analogy is, yeah, that's a really great way to visualize it. Um, this leads me to another question, but you were talking about the example of the fire drill that
Mhm.
happened, and you've mentioned it's usually for you, you've noticed this window of like 2.5 to 3 hours. I was kind of curious, like, do you ever find that that approximate time window varies depending on what's happening in your surroundings, or is it pretty much time dependent for you?
Um, I think it may be a little quicker when there's a lot of anxiety.
Okay.
If there's an anxiety-inducing situation or
Right.
um, stress has definitely played a huge part in, how I experience things. But I found, on just a regular day-to-day, nothing
Yeah.
really extravagant going on, it
Yeah.
typically is taking that long for me to feel awake enough.
Right.
But yeah, it can change. I
Yeah.
think, as I've gotten a little older, it may have extended maybe an additional couple of minutes.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I would say it's typically stays about the same.
Yeah. Wow. And I think that's such a helpful thing for people to understand is like, like you said, it might be a little shorter in a situation where there's anxiety, but it's not like it goes away. It's not like in a, super stressful situation, it's like, okay, I'm, operating at 100 like really quickly. It's, that inertia it's tough to overcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever remember a time waking up and being ready to go. Right,
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, Haley, thank you so much for, sharing your story and taking the time to chat about those experiences. It's been such a pleasure having you. And, thank you to everyone for joining us today, for all of your support and your questions in the comments. This brings us to the end of today's event. So thank you everyone for joining and participating. A reminder that Idiopathic Hypersomnia Day is right around the corner on June 7th. So we encourage you to take, this time to learn more about the condition, to support people in your network and extend your network and get to know more wonderful speakers like Haley through different programs. But Haley, thank you again for sharing such a powerful story and your inspiring journey through advocacy. It's been really, really wonderful chatting with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, thanks everyone. Tune in for our next program. We'll see you soon. Okay.